All right. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, just to remind you and alert you, as you probably heard, this webinar is being recorded. My name is Philip Freeberg. I'm a local government law educator with the UW Extension Local Government Center, or actually the UW Extension, UW-Madison Division of Extension Local Government Education. We have gone through some transitions. And the recording that you heard referred to will be available on the Wisconsin Counties Association website, and we will also link to it from the UW-Madison Division of Extension Local Government Education Center. And if this is our second webinar in the County Officials Workshops, or COWS, as we call it, because of how that acronym spells out. And I want to briefly get you acclimated to the process. Many of you were probably here last Monday. And again, if you missed that, that is up on the web to view. At the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar. And if you look there, we have a technical director assisting us today, Chelsea Severin from University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Educational Technical Services. If you're having some difficulties or questions, there is a chat box down there, and you can click on that and bring any problems that you may be experiencing or questions regarding the presentation or hearing or seeing anything to Chelsea's attention. If the other advantage we're having with this format of webinar is you can ask questions and answers. On the right half of the toolbar, you'll see a kind of cartoon bubble that says Q&A. And if you click on that, you can ask a question of the speakers. I will be looking at that during the presentations, and the speakers can check that themselves. So we can try to address your questions through that Q&A box. So make note of that and keep track of that. Without the only other thing I think I maybe want to make sure you're aware of is if you are having technical difficulties and they cannot seem to be handled through chat with Chelsea, please look at your email. There's some phone numbers in there of the Zoom company itself where you can call and get some help. And if you're having trouble connecting, there's also on your email that gave you the link, a telephone number if for some reason maybe your internet is having some problems this morning. Let's begin our program, and we'll begin with our first presenter. Our topics today is Wisconsin's open meeting law and also agendas and minutes. So we're meeting today to talk about meeting. And our first presenter is Daniel Foth, who has a law degree, but is a recovering lawyer and doesn't currently practice. He is the interim director of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Local Government Education. And he will be presenting specifically on the Wisconsin Open Meetings Law. And any further information you need to get better acquainted with him, I'm going to leave for him to do. So Daniel, please take over the program from this point.
Thank you, Philip. Again, as Philip mentioned, my name is Daniel Foth, and I am the interim program manager for the local government education program. When we merged with back into the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we became a education program and are no longer a center, although we're still in kind of the transition stage. As Philip mentioned, I'm a retired attorney by trade and education, but I spent the bulk of my 40-year career in public infrastructure, from highways, transit, airports, railroads, public-private utilities. And what that has to do with procedures for local government meetings, well, we're going to find out. Oop, now I need to put my presentation up. I guess that would be helpful. Here we go. All right, so what we're going to cover today is what is a meeting, what the Wisconsin open meeting law requirements are, including public notice requirements, closed sessions, electronic meetings, and penalties. We were going to have a poll today, but we had some technical difficulties, so I'm going to skip by these two areas. I would like everybody to mentally answer this one, and this is to help me understand how smart you all are. A is I'm brilliant. B, it's no one's business but my own how brilliant I is. C, I'm smarter than the average bear. D, I'm pretty darn smart, but I keep that to myself. And E, average brain power, but working on it. And if you'd like to know how you compare against local government officials in towns, most of them answered C. If you'd like to compare yourself against local government officials with cities and villages, the answers are pretty evenly split between A and B. So let's start with the subject matter today. What is a meeting? Wisconsin statutes define a meeting as a gathering of members of a local government body for purposes of exercising its responsibilities. And that meeting definition pretty much tracks Webster's meeting definition. So it's a pretty standard definition of a meeting. The intent of the open meetings law is to ensure public access, open discussion, information gathering, and voting. And that's really important, the information gathering piece, because a lot of people think that it only covers discussion and voting. Through advanced public notice of meetings, meetings that are open and accessible to the public, and very limited closed sessions. So who is subject to the law? Again, the statutes indicate local governing bodies of general and special purpose units of government, their committees, commissions, and boards, study and advisory committees, any governmental or quasi-governmental corporations. So basically, any body that's created by the parent body. And keep in mind that if your study or advisory committees include citizens, those citizen members are also subject to the open meeting law. And there's two tests for a meeting. First, there's numbers test. Are there enough members of a body present to determine the outcome of an action? And two, a purpose test. Are you discussing county business as opposed to fishing or some other non-county business topic? Here we have 3 members of a 5-member finance committee getting together at the local restaurant, chit-chatting away. So the numbers test. Half of the members are present, then there's a presumption that a meeting has occurred, but the presumption's rebuttable. And if there's less than half of the members, it still may be considered a meeting because of someone abstaining or not being able to vote or not attending. So remember, I mentioned there were 3 of the 5 members of the county board's finance committee having breakfast. Are they in violation of the open meetings law? So your answers would have been yes, no, what? No one said there was going to be a test. You need more information, and all of the above. The correct answer is you need more information. As I mentioned, the numbers test is first, if you have a quorum of members present, then that's a rebuttable presumption. So they met the numbers test because there were 3 of 5, but they were talking about fishing, not county finance board business. So it failed on that response. So you needed that additional information in order to answer this question. There are some special cases. Phone conferences. Oop, there they are. Texting, related examples. And so if you have a group of members meeting that could fit the numbers test of majority and you are meeting the purpose test, then if you email or text all of your local government supervisors, here you could have what's called a walking quorum, and that typically is where one member is trying to line up votes or conduct other business. And I thought this cartoon was a good example of sometimes the confusion because people have already set up the votes. Public notice requirement. Every meeting shall be preceded by a public notice. Separate notice for each meeting, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Must be reasonably proximate to the date and time of the meeting. So if you have on your website a full year's calendar of when your meetings are, that is not reasonably proximate to the meeting. It also fails for another reason, which I'll get to. Special exemption for sub-unit meetings. So if you have a meeting and then decide right after the meeting you're going to get the board finance committee together to talk over something that was discussed at the meeting, as long as you announce it at the meeting, that is permitted. So what does the public notice have to deal with? First, it has the date, time, and place. So here we have the Richland County agenda. Note they have the date, May 19, 2020. They have the location, the highway shop at 120 Bowen Circle, Richland Center. And they also, this is a good example of meeting the recent Office of Open Government, from the Attorney General's guidance on electronic meetings. So this passes the date, time, and place test. Then you have subject matter. And subject matter is the biggest issue that usually comes up regarding a meeting agenda. You must apprise the public of what will be addressed, and only agenda items may be discussed. The subject matter, each agenda item must be specific so the people reading it understand what is happening and the import of what's happening. It does not grant citizens the right to participate, but you as the governing body may include a public comment period if you so desire. So here's an agenda, and let's see if it passes the subject matter test. We have the road maintenance and highway report, road maintenance update. That isn't very specific, so it's not too clear what that is. I'm not sure that would pass the subject matter test. Discussion and decision regarding water runoff onto River Road near fire location number 1708. That probably would pass the test. It's specific enough, especially if there are no street addresses. The fire address is probably the closest you're going to get. And the zoning administrator report. Is that specific? No, not too specific. And so what I would suggest if you're going to have reports at your meetings is that you just listen to the report, note it's being submitted, and leave it at that. Public notice. How, when? At least 24 hours prior to the meeting. There is an exception for good cause, and good cause has not yet been defined by the courts or the Attorney General, but the Attorney General has made it pretty clear that it's an emergency type situation. So for example, if you've got some flooding in your county and it just happened overnight after the first meeting notice went out, but you need to deal with some of the issues at your board meeting, as long as you get it out 2 hours before the meeting, that's considered good. That would probably be considered good cause. Now, if you forgot to add something to the agenda, that likely would not be considered good cause. There were some law changes that actually they occurred last year, went into effect this year. It used to be that the Office of Open Government, the Attorney General, was the arbiter of what was noticed to whom. Now you have, it's all been codified and they've added a provision. So we have the first is posting notice in at least 3 public places, likely to give notice to the persons affected. So it doesn't say what the public places are. It could be a grocery store, it could be your county bulletin board like here, or it could be some other place where people are likely to gather and see the notice. A new requirement established in the legislation was posting a notice in at least one public place likely to give notice to people affected, such as your county bulletin board, and placing a notice electronically on the governmental body's internet website. So that's a new provision, and one that it gives you a little more flexibility in terms of posting. And then of course you can always post by paid publication in a news media likely to give notice to people affected, including your official newspaper, if you have one. If you don't have one, then you may publish it in a news media likely to give notice. And you always have to provide notice to any news media who has requested it. And they do not need to request it for every meeting. They could have a blanket request for all meetings. By whom? Who provides the public notice? Well, the person responsible is not the clerk. It is the chief presiding officer. So your county board chair or your committee or board chairs would be the person responsible for the public notice. However, they can provide a designee, usually the clerk. So if any clerks are listening in, sorry, you were off the hook for just a minute. The ultimate responsibility, however, is with the chief presiding officer. Public access. Must be reasonable access. In other words, people should be able to reasonably get to the meeting. If you believe you have a controversial topic, or you know you have a controversial topic, and you believe there'll be a large crowd, then it's advised that you move the meeting to a place where a large crowd can congregate, or you create a way that the large crowd can at least watch and hear what's going on. For example, City of Madison School Board last year had a couple of controversial topics, and they basically set up a closed circuit TV where people could gather in a larger room and watch, and then the board actually met in a small room. Must be proximate to the public served. In other words, if you have a controversial topic and the biggest room is in another county, that's probably not proximate to the public served. Permitted closed sessions. As I noted earlier, you're allowed to have closed sessions, but your ability to have a closed session is limited by what the statute provides. Deliberations, including judicial or quasi-judicial issues. Personnel matters are exempted or allowed to be closed. Deliberations on property acquisitions and investments. Competitive or bargaining issues. Now, the statute allows you to close a session, but the statute does not require that you close a session. For personnel matters, there may be some other laws or health matters that require confidentiality, but the open meeting law does not. You're allowed to meet in open whenever you would like, subject to what other laws may require. Closed meeting procedures. You must first convene an open session. You must announce the authority and purpose of the proposed closed session. So this needs to be on your agenda that you intend to go into closed session. You must have a majority vote, and you must show the vote of each member. And the reason that that's important is that if you go into closed session unlawfully, in other words, you didn't have a reason that met one of the statutory requirements, then those persons who vote no are not liable under the open meeting law. Those persons who vote yes are liable. And if the vote's unanimous, whoever's taking the minutes should note that so that it's clear who did or did not vote in favor of going into closed session. More procedures. Who's allowed to go into the closed session? Well, any governing board member, whether they voted yes or no to go into closed session, are allowed. Any personnel essential to the discussion. You must limit the discussion to the announced items. And you cannot reconvene an open session unless it was included in the public notice. So if you intend to go into closed session, do your closed session business and then come back into open session, your published meeting notice should state so. So here's a closed session example. We had a call to order, the roll call to see who was attending the meeting, then a notice to go into closed session, and note here that it notes that one of the closed session exemptions to interview applicants for the position of county administrator, then note that they were going to return to open session and then they were going to adjourn. So this is a pretty good notice of a closed session. Electronic meetings. Also, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Office of Open Government at the Attorney General issued some new advisory opinions, one on March 17th and one on March 20th. It was dealt with video conferencing and telephones meetings. The advisory says must be reasonably accessible to the public. So that means you should include the remote link and phone number. And if you remember the agenda I showed you earlier, did include the electronic links and a phone number to call in. Non-remotely a place the public can access. If you remember the previous notice, they were meeting at the County Highway Department. And I believe that was because they wanted to be able to establish some physical distancing so that it was safe for someone to come and listen into the meeting. There must always be a telephone option so someone can listen in if they don't have an internet link or a computer. The access information must be part of the notice. And again, going back to the notice I sent, it was clearly part of the notice and well done. Meeting protocols. Governing board members should identify themselves before each meeting and before speaking. Complex plans, drawings may be an issue. The second advisory committee advisory that came out dealt a lot with that. So if you're doing some kind of a zoning item or planning item that requires a lot of maps and pictures, that may not pass muster here. When possible, the Attorney General advises recording the meeting and make available, similar to what we're doing today with this meeting. And I see we have a couple of questions, so I'm going to stop here and take those. For closed session is proper notice if it just states the statute for the closed session. The answer to that, it has to state the specific statute that allows it, just as that notice I showed you did. You can't just
Daniel,
say,
I'd also interject in on that one too, that you still need to state the subject matter. There are opinions of the Attorney General that have said just saying the statute is not enough. That is not notice at all. It's too generic.
Thank you, Philip. Next question. We get many people that log in or call in at live meeting. We have a sign-in sheet. Can we ask them to identify themselves if they log in or call in online? Philip, I don't see why not. Philip, do you have a thought on this?
Sorry, I'm unmuting. Nothing's wrong with asking. I don't think you can require that they identify, but if they were to try to ask a question, I think it's appropriate. If you have rules for public participation, that require that if you're having any rules regarding public participation, the best process is to do that up front. I think Sarah will talk about that in a little more detail, but based on just simply requiring them to log in, you can request, but I don't know any reason why they couldn't just use their first name, or any other means, because the purpose is to allow them to participate in the same manner as if they were in the room with you. And very often you ask people to sign in when they're in the room with you, but I don't think that you can, under the open meeting law, require that they actually sign it. But you have rules for participation, that may be, you know, you can do that there, but it has to be formally done. You can't make it up as you go along.
There was a comment here, the DNR has folks ID themselves so they can put a person to a phone number when it's time for public comment. It takes some time at the beginning of the meeting, but it works well. And then we have a question, the final question, 3 members of a 5-member committee go downtown to tavern for drinks after the full county board meeting, lawful? Well, first of all, I think that might be a better example than having breakfast together. I might start using that. Secondly, again, it depends on what they discuss. So the numbers test, yes, there's 3 to 5, so that's clearly a quorum. But if they go down to the local bar just to talk about what they're going to do the next day, or how they're going to all lie to each other when they're fishing about the size fish they caught, that's a lawful conversation because it does not meet the purpose test. However, if they talk any county business in any way, shape, or form, that would not be permitted. Philip, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, the only thing to add too is the burden's going to be onto them since they meet the presumption of a meeting under the numbers test and the presumption, which means they're the ones that are going to have to prove they weren't talking about county business. So it, you know, and I think that's something that as county board supervisors, you need to be conscious of and careful about, realizing that it's not per se illegal, but it's going to be your burden to prove what you're talking about when you do have a numbers test met when you gather socially. So it's best to realize that, and just kind of as a general comment too, you know, part of the reason for open meeting law is to inspire confidence in the public. And if you have that kind of gathering regularly, first of all, the temptation to talk county business is great. And secondly, you're going to create a lot of questions about how you're conducting yourself as a member of the board.
Thanks. Oh, I tried this here. There we go. Penalties. One of the penalties for violating the open meeting law. Former colleague Dan Hill always had this picture up, and so no, there is not a death penalty for violating the open meeting law. Any member could have a $25 to $300 non-reimbursable forfeiture. Attorney fees may or may not be reimbursable, and that's where probably the serious money is in terms of potential violation. Obviously, loss of public trust and personal embarrassment is noted by this person here for having violated the open meeting law. For Philip's benefit, I usually have a little questionnaire about how your body adjourns. And the point here is that once you're done with the agenda, under the open meeting law, you cannot discuss any other business, so you're effectively done. So typically I like to ask people, do they have a motion to adjourn? Does the chair declare the agenda is done, the meeting's over? Does everybody just leave or some other? And always the answer is either A or B here. Never had anybody answer C or D yet. So we have a couple
of, yeah, you have questions here.
Yep.
How many? Want me to relay them to you?
No, I've got them right here.
Okay.
How many people meet a quorum? If we have 29 supervisors, is there a percentage or is it based on the subject matter? A quorum is 50% plus 1. So if you have 29 supervisors, that would be 15. Is my math right, Philip?
Yeah, correct.
Yep. So it's not based on the subject matter, it's based on the bodies, the number of people. Next question, is it a problem if 3 of 5 members of the committee talk about county business in a larger gathering such as a neighborhood meeting? If the members of the committee are going to the neighborhood meeting, you should send a notice. Remember I said earlier that all meetings must be noticed. So for example, if you have these three members going to a neighborhood meeting, and that is a quorum of the committee involved with that meeting, then yes, you need to have a notice for that meeting that those members may be attending the meeting.
Yeah, and I would only add to that, that's not somebody's opinion. That was an actual court case. And if you're going, and even if it's for the purpose of just gathering information, if the information relates to your duties as a county official and you have a quorum present, then a notice is required.
And if you have a committee meeting and a quorum of the board decides to attend the meeting, then the other thing to keep in mind is now you need to have two notices, one for the meeting itself and a separate one for the members, the other members attending the meeting that may constitute a quorum. And that was that same court case. For violations of the open meeting law, are there actions taken in violation invalidated? Yes. Philip, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, in addition, to, I can't remember what the slide said, but in addition to the penalties is the court handling the violation. If it deems it appropriate and in the public interest, they can invalidate any actions that were taken at a meeting in violation of the open meeting law, which is probably the best advice, I think, because there's no point in intentionally or trying to avoid compliance with the open meeting law, because whatever you're doing could possibly be undone. So it's sort of like, what the point? Let's try to do it right from the beginning, at the outset.
All right, next question. A member of a town board in my district contacted me concerned about a violation of open meetings on her board. What is the role of a county supervisor in how the town village boards conduct their business? So the answer here is that the supervisor could certainly talk to the member of the town board, but if a violation has been brought, then I believe, Philip, it's the district attorney that would deal with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, the way it works under is if you file your complaints must first go to the district attorney. So that would be that official's responsibility. And if the person files a verified complaint of a violation, in other words, they swear to it being true, then the district attorney has 20 days to either start a prosecution or not start one. And after 20 days, if the DA doesn't, then the person can go into court themselves and take the members of that body to court to allege a violation of the open meetings law. And that's probably the most common way that it happens. And frequently those plaintiffs are members of the people starting the legal actions are members of the news media.
Next question. How long in advance must a meeting notice be published? As noted in one of the earlier slides, a minimum of 24 hours unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstances or special circumstances. And then the next question, with local rallying, protests going on, and say 7 of 21 supervisors attend, but don't gather together to discuss protest topics, yet discuss in groups of 2s or 3s, is this a violation? Well, if it's 7, you would need 12 to have a quorum. So I don't see a violation. The problem is here with even starting the discussion, as Philip mentioned earlier, that it doesn't take long before 7 turns into 12. So it's best not to have those discussions in 2s or 3 groups of 2s or 3s, because pretty soon you're going to add up to 12, and then that's where you have a problem. Philip, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, right. And remember, the purpose test is that the purpose must relate to something within the jurisdiction of the county. So, you know, depends on the nature of the protest or whatever, and if what is going on and being discussed relates to any matter that the county has any power regarding. So that purpose test, it's always a two-pronged test. The numbers start you talking about whether or not you get to the purpose test, but with 7 of 21, you're not at the numbers test yet at that point anyway. So then we wouldn't even get to the purpose test.
Great. I believe that is all the questions.
Okay. Well, Daniel, if you can stop sharing your screen.
Couple more things, Phil.
Okay.
We do have a number of resources that are noted in your materials, both at the Counties Association, Local Government Center, and the Office of Open Government, the Attorney General. And with that, thank you all.
Okay. And now I'll pull the hook on you.
There we go.
And apologies for doing that early. Now we'll turn to our next presenter who's preparing. Sarah Dietrich Kasdorf presented last week, and many of you got the chance to become acquainted with her and some of her knowledge base. And I think it's only fair to say that she's been working with counties for probably longer than she would care to me to say, and you'll find her to be rich in her knowledge and experience of counties issues. And she's going to address to you the issues of agendas and minutes for county boards and county meetings. And so I will turn it over to you at this point in time.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I am trying to share my screen, and all I am seeing right now is somebody else's screen. I didn't unmute first, and I couldn't find the unmute button. So we are attempting here. I don't know if I need to get out of, if you guys need to give me permission again to share my.
Try now, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I apologize
Yeah.
that me screwing that up with my lack of technical knowledge here. Just so you guys, just as a way of background, I'm Sarah Dietrich Kasdorf. I'm the Deputy Director of Government Affairs at the Wisconsin Counties Association. As Philip said, I've been with the association for a long time. In September, it will be 29 years since I joined the association. During that time, I have worked on a wide variety of issues related to county government. Let's see here if I can, nope, still can't share my screen. I apologize, that's what I get for not muting myself ahead of time. So we have, it looks like we have 2 additional questions on the open meetings piece. If you guys want to address those.
Okay.
Try to get the
I'll
text
try and address those.
here.
And then Chelsea, if you let me know if you need me to address the co-hosting designation.
All right, that sounds good.
Okay. We have the question is, do the numbers tests also apply when supervisors are not together physically, but together on a Zoom meeting or other type of electronic meeting? Yeah, you must have come in late, because absolutely they does. Here's the thing, if the way that you're communicating has the nature of a direct give and take, like a conversation, as if you were in the same room together, then the open meeting law applies. So it applies to Zoom meetings, it applies to telephone conferences, it could apply to a series of telephone conferences, which is what we call the walking quorum, if it's for the purpose of trying to get business accomplished or getting votes lined up. So that's an excellent question and a good review. Then we also have the question what's a technical question?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that one privately, Phil.
Okay.
All right, I think I'm all set. So I think we're good to start. I'm going to talk to you today about agendas and minutes for county board and committee meetings. And this is really this presentation is really a complement to the open meetings law presentation that you just heard from Daniel. This first slide that I have here is found in a number of our presentations. I think when you see our association give our roles and responsibilities presentation, you will see this slide. You will probably see this slide from me next week as well as we talk about running effective meetings. But I like to put it up because every time there's a question in county government and with regard to your procedures and what you should be doing at your meetings, there are really three places that you should look. The first place is state statute, and counties must always ensure that they are in compliance with state statutes. There are some places in Robert's Rules of Order where the statutes conflict with what Robert's Rules said. And again, because these three sources of procedural rules do have a hierarchy, state statute trumps everything else. And then there's local rules, also known as your county board rules. Sometimes there's a county that will adopt a county handbook or call it something a little different than their county board rules. But most counties do adopt local rules as part of their ordinances at their organizational meetings. And these are places where counties will set procedures that may be a little different from what Robert's Rules of Order state. And then finally, Robert's Rules of Order. It is really the default for most, if not all of the counties. If state statutes or a local rule does not apply or does not address the issue, then you would look to Robert's Rules of Order for your guidance with regard to your procedures. One thing though I just want to note with regard to Robert's Rules of Order is Robert's was not written for governmental use. And so the procedures that are outlined in Robert's Rules for your meetings apply to all types of meetings. So again, counties must make sure that we are not only looking at Robert's, but again, that we are in compliance with state statutes and local rules, regardless of what it is that Roberts says. So to begin, let's discuss how agendas are created and what must be included on agendas before we tackle minutes. So let's talk about the purpose of an agenda. An agenda really sets the expectations for what will occur at a meeting. It provides advance notice to the members of the governmental body, to the public, as well as to the media about what items are going to be discussed at the meeting. And it also tells you what order that the business will be considered at the meeting. Now, while a county can take items out of order, the Attorney General does put a little bit of a caution on that, because if a member of the public, for example, sees that the issue that they are interested in is at the end of a lengthy agenda and you move that item up to the top of the agenda, there is some concern that that individual will miss hearing the discussion on that because you moved an item up and something that would have probably happened an hour and a half into the meeting, and instead the item took place in the first 5 minutes of the meeting. So there is some caution to be said if you are going to rearrange your agenda. Another reason that agendas are important is that it really keeps the body on task. It makes sure that counties, are following a particular process and following an order in which to conduct its business, and it keeps folks from getting off a track and trying to take up issues that maybe should not be brought up at that particular meeting. However, 99% of the time, a meeting agenda does serve as the meeting notice because they typically contain all of the items that are legally required in the meeting notice, as well as the detailed content of the meeting. And Daniel discussed the contents of the meeting notice with you guys a little earlier. Again, just a quick refresh. Agendas need to be in compliance with the open meetings law with regard to public notice. As we talked about and got a lot of questions about, 24 hours is the minimum required. However, most county boards do notice their meetings well in advance of the required 24-hour notice. Again, it is possible in an emergency situation to hold a meeting with less than 24 hours. At that point, you would have to give a minimum of 2 hours of notice, but it is really infrequent where that would happen at the county level. One of the other things to note is that if your county puts out a single list of its meetings for the month, that single listing of all meetings would not be sufficient, and you do need to put out a separate notice for each separate meeting.
Sarah, I'm going to interject with there's a question that came in that was real good, and it's a simple one, is whether state statutes or county ordinances have greater precedence.
Oh,
And
state statute, it trumps everything. State statute has the highest precedence, and then it would be your county board rules, and then it would be Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Philip?
Nope, you nailed it.
Okay. All right. This is a question we get asked a lot at our office, and that's who really has the authority to set the agenda. The presiding officer or their designee, who is oftentimes the county clerk, is responsible for developing the meeting agenda and for noticing the meeting. Again, as Daniel mentioned earlier, the legal responsibility for noticing the meeting does reside with the presiding officer, but oftentimes they will designate the county clerk to do that. Now, even though that the requirement falls on the presiding officer, there is also a statutory role for the county clerk here as well. Wisconsin Statutes 59.23 talks about the role of the county clerk, and it states that the county clerk does create the agenda for the meetings under the direction of the county board chairperson or a committee chairperson. I think it is really important for counties to work very closely with their county clerks when they are setting agendas and putting out their public notices. And there are two really good reasons for that. First of all, your county clerk will help ensure that you are in compliance with the open meetings law. And secondly, it does provide for consistency across all county meetings, which is really important for your public notice. Excuse me. Now, counties have many, many different ways to set their meeting agendas. Excuse me. We see counties do things. We have 72 counties. Oftentimes you will hear there are 72 different ways of doing things. And that may be very well true with regard to agenda setting at the county level. So while counties have various and different ways in which to set their agenda, one thing should be uniform among all counties, and that is the adoption of written procedures with regard to the development of your agendas. So as part of your county organizational rules, you should really outline a clear process that delineates how items would get on either the county board or a committee agenda. And if you have this clear process stated in your rules, it will save you from a lot of headaches down the road when a supervisor wants to place an item on the agenda and there is some resistance to place that item on the agenda by either the board or committee chair or other members who may serve on the body. So no matter what approach is taken, again, just to reiterate, you should have rules that specify procedures for how members can contribute items to an agenda for a meeting. And members have a responsibility to understand what their rights are with regard to the procedures for accessing the agenda. Now, members can request that items be placed on an agenda of a specific future meeting. However, somebody does not have a right to demand that an item be placed on an agenda. According to Robert's Rules of Order, a board could vote to place an item on the agenda. However, that would typically require a need to suspend the rules and then have a positive vote of 2/3 of the members in order to place an item on the agenda. But if you go that route and the vote fails, then the item will not be placed on the agenda. If the item is if you are successful in your suspension of the rules, you need to keep in mind, though, that that item cannot be taken up at that particular meeting because it likely was not noticed on the agenda, and you would be in violation of the open meetings law if you were to discuss that item and it was not noticed. Now, committees have many different ways in which they set the agenda. Again, please have in your county board rules how items get placed on your committee agendas. Some counties, with regard to committees, leave it up to the discretion of the committee chair how an item gets on the agenda. Sometimes the chair will work with the committee clerk to jointly develop an agenda. Oftentimes, department heads work with committees in the development of an agenda, or sometimes there will be committees that will have at the end of each agenda a place to discuss some potential topics that they could discuss at their next meeting. Again, there are many, many ways to do this, but I highly recommend that you have county board rules in place that set these processes and procedures. All right, this next slide is kind of a sample agenda, if you will, of a county board meeting. It really talks about the elements of a meeting as well as a sequence of how you may wish to have your meeting operate. It is, one thing I would say is if your county is utilizing Robert's Rules of Order, again, Robert's was not written for local units of government. So oftentimes you will see county boards in their county board rules adopt an order of business. If you don't have that within your county board rules, again, I think that's something that you may want to discuss within your county. Quick note here I want to make on agendas in general is you will notice that this set of agenda elements contains some items that are pretty generic in nature, such as special orders and new business and reports. Because counties need to make sure that they're in compliance with the open meetings law, we want to make sure that your agenda does not list things such as old business, new business, such other matters as authorized by law, staff comments, unless under each of those generic titles, you list something more specific, in terms of what it is you're going to talk about. So while it may be fine to list new business, it can't just say new business. It has to say new business resolution number 2020-03 relating to, hiring of a new county administrator, for example. So again, you have to have specificity along with that generic title if you use a generic title on your agenda. There are also a number of counties that will use a consent agenda for their county board meetings as well. If you're going to adopt items utilizing a consent calendar, you also need to make sure that each item is spelled out on that particular agenda. And again, I cannot stress enough about the use of generic terms on the agenda. The Attorney General has provided guidance on this. He talks about those items being insufficient standing alone as they identify particular subjects at all. They lack an informational value. It fails to give reasonable notice of what will be discussed. The notice has to he also said that the notice has to reasonably apprise the public of the meeting subject matter. So new business, such other businesses allowed by law, does not at all apprise the public of what particular subject matters may be discussed at a meeting. In addition, you need to ask yourself when you're looking at your agenda, whether or not a person who is interested in a specific subject would be aware upon reading the notice that the subject might be discussed. If the answer to that is no, they would not be aware, then your agenda item is not specific enough and you need to go back and modify your agenda item to provide additional specificity. All right, let's just quickly go through each of these elements and the sequences of a meeting. Call to order, I think that everyone understands call to order. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no business is conducted until the meeting is called to order. Roll call, again, pretty standard agenda item. And again, we'll talk about this later under meeting minutes, but really the meeting minutes really should reflect who was in attendance at the meeting. Certification of compliance with the open meetings law. That is an optional item, not required to be placed on an agenda. We do see this item on a number of county board agendas. Oftentimes, the county board chair may ask the county clerk to verify that the open meetings law has been complied with and that proper public notice has been provided. So the clerk may make a statement to that effect. However, we certainly do not recommend that counties vote on this particular item because it could put your county board members at risk if there is a violation of the open meetings law. Approval of the agenda. Again, that is something that we see sometimes on county board agendas. That just in essence means that the body is agreeing to the order of the items on the agenda. Again, there's no legal requirement in which to adopt the agenda. It's not really an actionable item per se because notice has already been provided to the public with regard to what items are going to be included on the agenda. If you have approval of the agenda on your county board agenda, you cannot add new items to the agenda at this point because that would be a violation of the open meetings law. Sometimes counties will use this agenda item to modify the order of an agenda item, but again, you need to be careful with regard to that. If you know a large member of the public is coming for an item that is later on in the agenda, you can't move it up to the top of the agenda to avoid having members of the public listen to a particular discussion. It would be appropriate to remove items from an agenda at this time if for some reason you posted an agenda and the body is not ready to meet, or the committee whose work you anticipated being completed was not completed. Then you can certainly remove an item from an agenda at this particular time, as there's no requirement to take up every single item that is included on an agenda. With regard to citizen and public comments, there is no requirement for counties to do this. If you do allow citizen and public comments, though, it must be included in your meeting notice, which means typically it is on your agenda. We highly, highly recommend that if you allow citizen or public comments, that you establish rules with regard to how citizen comment will happen, when it happens during your meeting, as well as how long somebody has the ability to speak. So you might have a rule that says, public comment will be allowed, individuals must register, each individual will have up to 3 minutes to speak. And then you may want to specify whether or not they can only talk about items that are included on that particular, on the agenda for that day, or if you will allow them to talk about any items. A couple other points on citizen comments. It is really advisable to do that at the beginning or at the top of your agenda so that it keeps the public out of the debate process. One of the things I know we typically, encourage our counties to do is rather than have citizen comments at the county board meeting, it actually may be more helpful and more useful to have citizen comments at the committee level, because that is in essence where a lot of the real work is done in developing, the ordinance or the resolution or the policy that the county is going to be adopting. Pretty oftentimes with regard to citizen comments, things are pretty well baked by the time they get to the county board level. So meaningful citizen input can may be more useful at the committee level. Philip, did you have something on that?
Yeah, before you leave this topic, there is a question, can a supervisor comment during citizen comment portion of the agenda?
I've seen different things on that. Philip, you can help me with this one. I would say that there is a risk of an open meetings law violation if a county board member gets into a debate with regard to a citizen, especially if the citizen is talking about an item that is not on the agenda for that evening's meeting. Philip, you're the attorney here.
Yeah, and there's two aspects of that, and I think you touched on one. Is if a citizen brings up an issue and it's not one hasn't been noticed, citizen comment is not an opportunity for members of the board to kick the issue around. if it calls for a response that would be simply a simple fact response or a clarification, that's fine. But otherwise, then you run the risk of the open meeting violation, precisely as Sarah says. I think the other thing is, I've heard of supervisors who want to comment on something that's not on the agenda, and so they'll offer that off, saying they're doing that as a citizen comment. And there's going to be problems with that. One is, there hasn't been a clear court statement on that, but what courts have said is the difference between citizens and members of the board is the board have a role in creating the agenda. Citizens don't, which is part of the reasons that the open meeting law then allows for citizen comments. And I think you run another risk of violating the open meeting law if a member of the body is going to try to use that to comment. One distinction might be is if you're conducting a hearing and you have a right to be heard on an issue, to some degree there may be an argument that says that's not going to deprive you, but you're not going to be sitting on that body if you have an interest in an issue. You're going to be removing yourself from the body and its process because of that conflict. We'll talk about that in the last one. But I would say probably the best practice is not to comment by the body members during it, and it's certainly not an opportunity to have a discussion on the issue.
All right. Thank you, Philip.
And it says, is the community comment recorded anywhere? And I think you're probably getting up to that when you get to 2 minutes. So maybe the answer to that one is stay tuned, right?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll get to that.
Okay. All right. So we will,
as we move forward.
I seem to remember it in there. If it gets overlooked, please ask it again. I'm gonna note that it has been answered live. But if you're not satisfied by the time we get to the end of Sarah's presentation, please bring it up again. And we have another one is, can a supervisor who is not on the committee speak? I think you can address that one, Sarah.
I was going to say, I think a lot of that depends on your county board rules. They do not have a right, though, to sit at the table. I don't believe they have the right to participate in the debate. But again, I think some counties may allow that. Philip, do you have?
Yeah, and I think one thing's clear is it is a meeting of the body, and the body in question is the committee. And if a supervisor, first of all, under the open meeting law, has a right to attend other committee meetings unless you adopt some other rule. So you can't prohibit another supervisor from coming to a committee meeting. And that would include coming to a closed session of a committee meeting unless you you adopt a specific rule. That's an open meeting law provision. But whether they comment, they don't have a right to comment, except as the public might have a right to comment during a meeting. So basically, they're not to be heard, but you can certainly, by consensus, suspend the rules and allow a comment from a supervisor that is attending, or if you need to address a question to them. The general rule would be a committee meeting is for the members of that committee, and that's the ones that are going to do the speaking. And then if there's any variation of that rule is for the committee to decide either by formal vote or just by consensus that they want to hear from the supervisor. And we keep coming here. Okay, we just answered that one. All right, back to you, Sarah.
Okay, all right. Moving on with our agenda topics. Correspondence. A lot of times we'll see counties have correspondence that they received listed on their county board agenda. They may ask the clerk, or the county board chair may go through correspondence that's received, sometimes from the counties association, from other local units of government. The Attorney General has provided guidance on this, that if you are going to go through correspondence, you should have listed on your agenda the topic of the correspondence or the subject matter of that correspondence. Otherwise, again, you may risk violating the open meetings law. Reading and approval of the minutes. Of course, that's a pretty simple agenda item. If the minutes are sent to everybody in advance, it should take no more than a few moments to dispose of this agenda topic. Counties have different procedures for approval. Sometimes counties will just, ask for, the board chair may say, you've received the minutes from the previous meeting. Are there any corrections? If there are none, then the minutes are approved as distributed. Sometimes, counties will take a motion to approve and adopt the minutes as well. Again, take a look at your county board rules, and that will determine the procedure that you guys use for the adoption of your minutes. Reports. This is another area on an agenda where there is the potential for violating the open meetings law. On your agenda, you should be listing who is giving the subject matter or who is giving the report, as well as the subject matter of the report. But as I think Daniel stated earlier, do not vote to accept or approve reports. Just say thank you for the report, place the report on file if it's appropriate, and then move on with your agenda. Special orders. Special orders are typically items that were not completed at a prior meeting. It may be something that was postponed to a time certain, and the time certain is your current meeting. And so those are items, again, where you cannot just write special orders or items postponed from previous meetings on your agenda. Instead, you must state the topic very clearly on your agenda, again, to avoid an open meetings law violation.
Sarah, I'm going to interrupt real quickly, mainly because I just did a screw up. I was trying to answer a question that someone's asked if a town board, if somebody brought up a matter and the board just has a consensus to take an action such as approving a stop sign. First of all, stop signs require ordinances to do that. And secondly, but that's not the point. Yes, that would be a violation of open meeting law. You do not take any action during citizen comment. Citizen comment is for, think about it, for citizens to comment, not for boards to comment, not for boards to act, be it at any level, town, city, county, committee. And I'm sorry that I was going to give you a quick answer in writing on that one, and I goofed it up. So I apologize for having to interrupt because of my screw up there.
All right, let's move on to unfinished business. Again, one of those generic topics that you should not have on your agenda unless, of course, you list with specificity the topics that are going to be taken up under this. This is typically subject matter that was brought up at a previous meeting but needs further discussion or action. Again, they can be items that were postponed or that were referred to a committee previously that are now coming back to the board. All of these items do need to be included on the agenda or your notice, public notice for the meeting. New business, again, not typically listed on the agenda this way, but there are other catchphrases that you may see, such as other business, any other business that may properly come before the committee, or any other business is allowed by law. Typically, there is no such thing as any other business as allowed by law, because you would be in violation of the open meetings law if you were to take something up that was not listed on the agenda. It's really not an opportunity to address items not on the agenda. It's just a category that includes subject matter that the body has not taken up at a previous meeting. But again, you need to list with specificity the items that you're going to take up under this element on your agenda. Set next meeting date. Typically at the county level, you have set meeting times. So oftentimes we're not seeing a lot of county boards or committees that are using this agenda item to set their next meeting date. Oftentimes it's really an opportunity for folks to have a little bit of discussion about what might be on the next meeting agenda. And then adjournment. Daniel asked the question earlier about adjournment and how you adjourn your meetings. Again, a motion is not required under Robert's Rules of Order. The presiding officer can just declare the meeting to be adjourned. Just some additional thoughts on the elements and sequences of a meeting agenda. Again, you're not required to follow the sequence in Robert's Rules of Order, and you are encouraged as a county to include in your county board rules a specific order of business that works for you. Oftentimes, when you're putting together a meeting agenda, logic might dictate what items should come first. For example, if there is an item that is important that you know is going to take a lot of time, you might want to list that item early on in your agenda. Oftentimes, too, we'll see county boards just have an order of business that will list their committees in alphabetical order, and they'll receive reports in that particular order. Couple of quick notes with regard to closed sessions. And again, Daniel talked about this earlier, but if you are going to go in the closed session, and if the chief presiding officer of the governmental body is aware that a closed session is contemplated, that chief executive officer is required to provide notice of the meeting. And the notice must contain the subject matter of the closed session. So again, if it's anticipated that you're going to go in the closed session, it must be properly noticed. And again, that notice for most counties is your agenda. When you are putting that closed session notice on your agenda, you need to include the subject matter, which is of the closed session meeting. You have to list the statutory exemption, but it has to be a little more than just one of the 13 statutory exemptions. You need to also list on your agenda what specific element of that statutory exemption you are going into closed session under. All right, that's all I have under meeting agenda. We're going to.
Sarah, maybe before you get into that, we have some questions that have to do on agenda. Maybe this would be a good time, do you think, to address those?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. We have this question. If an individual wants to make announcements, should that be listed on the agenda, such as events like pancake breakfast, farm tech days, road tours, etc.? And I'll throw that out to you, but see what you think on that first.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you could certainly have listed on your agenda in order of business for general announcements like that. Sometimes I think you'll see at the end of a county board meeting when they talk about that setting the next meeting date or other topics, folks will just stand up there and throw out, come to the pancake breakfast for the Kiwanis Club on Saturday. I'll be working the event. That's really unrelated to county business. Philip, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I've been to several meetings where that has happened. I don't think it raises too many concerns under the open meetings law.
Well, yeah, the thing, first of all, the individual, I'm assuming by individual, you mean a member of the body. If it's a member of the public during public comment, well, then that's not what that's there for. And I think that would be a good thing, another reason to set up rules for public comment, saying this isn't to be the public bulletin board for meetings. For board members, I would throw up a yellow caution flag on those announcements for this reason. We'll talk about in the fourth segment about you're not to use your position for personal gain. And so for yourself, a member of your immediate family, or an organization that you're affiliated with. And we'll get into that in detail, but the caution flag I have on those announcements is it could potentially be using your position for a matter of personal interest. And so that would be a concern that you need to be alert to. My main concern is I think the announcements are irrelevant to the meeting of the body, so it's like as if you didn't have enough business already. You don't need to be adding extraneous stuff, but that's from a guy who sat through 30 years of meetings. The other question we have, Sarah, is under reports, is it possible to have various reports of staff and subcommittees, such as Division A report and Division B and Subcommittee A report? You want to speak to that?
Sure, I'll start and then you can jump in as the attorney. I think it would raise some red flags if you just said report of Human Services Director, Division of Mental Health. I think oftentimes in order to provide additional specificity and for the public to have a good understanding of what may come up and what discussion could come up under that report, you should probably have a little more specificity with regard to what is going to be included in that report.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. Just say report. Quite frankly, the Attorney General says it will never be sufficient just to say report. That is, they say that is evidence there of a violation if your agenda just says report. It should say something more. Report regarding the County Road Z project. Report regarding the county fair. So that you have to have the subject matter. Report is not a subject matter. How does anybody know what that report is covering and whether they have interest in coming to the meeting? So yeah, I just add those specific comments to what Sarah had there. The other question we have is, when is it proper for a county board supervisor to comment or state an opinion on a subject matter? Example, commenting on public news items. If it ain't on the agenda, you don't talk about it, do you, Sarah?
Yeah, I was gonna say, unless that particular item is an agenda topic for the meeting, I don't think there is a place on the agenda where it would be appropriate for a county board member to state their opinion on the current events of the day.
Then the next question we have, is it legal for a committee to amend the agenda at the meeting to move an item on the agenda to the beginning from the end? Sarah?
The answer is, it is possible in which to do that, but the Attorney General in his open meetings guidance has indicated that there's some potential red flags there, because if, again, you have a really popular topic that a large number of the public wants to come and listen to that particular meeting or that particular discussion, and you move it from the bottom of the agenda up to the top of the agenda, and they think it's going to come up at 8 o'clock because you have 20 agenda items to get to before that, and your meeting starts at 7:30 and you get to that item at 7:05. Did that really change the essence of your public notice and give the members of the public reasonable notice of the approximate time in which an item could come up? So I think, yes, you can change around the order of the agenda items, but there is a huge caution on there from the Attorney General about doing so.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just remember the purpose of the open meeting law is for the public to observe and have confidence in what governmental bodies are doing during their meetings. And so yeah, exactly as you say, Sarah, if you know it's going to be popular, that's probably not one to move, but otherwise you're well within your power to organize your agenda so long as it was noticed. There's no open meeting requirement that it be covered in the order that's on the agenda, but you do want to be careful that in doing so, you're not misleading any of the public. The other question, when we have a lot of them coming in, Sarah, so committee meeting times and dates need to have rules of order. I'm not exactly sure what that question is.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's with regard to, county board rules, for example. And sometimes counties will specify in their county board rules the dates and times in which a committee or the board may typically meet.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
Not a requirement, but oftentimes covered.
Yeah, okay, that probably answers the question whether or not there's a need for it. Often meeting procedures, if they are spelled out and it is recommended they be, that they also address, committee meeting procedures as well. So, it's more orderly done, but also better relations with the public too. They know what to expect. Next question we have is, are all agenda items required to be covered during a meeting?
The answer to that is no, you are not required to cover all agenda items on a meeting. There may be an instance in which, the committee may not have completed the work in time, and so you're not ready to take action. And so it's okay, and it is appropriate for a county to not take up all items that are included on the agenda. Things can be, certainly counties can postpone things to another meeting for any number of reasons. So again, if you are going to take up something, it is required to be on the agenda. But if something is on the agenda, you are not required to take it up at that meeting.
Here's another question then. It says, on agenda, it says meeting, quote, meeting topics may be discussed out of order listed below. Is that sufficient to cover it if we take things out of order? Yeah, and go ahead, Sarah.
I'll say I'm going to leave that to you.
Okay. Well, I think it really comes up in the next question. I mean, yeah, I think your question is addressing my comment, is that part of what you're doing is making sure that the public is aware of how things will be handled. And yeah, and I think that seems like an adequate way to avoid any misunderstandings. So it kind of says, well, you want to be in the door when the checkered flag of the meeting goes off and starts, and it quite possibly they might not necessarily be covered in the order. I would say it's even more than is required. So it's good in that regard. Necessary only if you're in a real big habit of switching around a lot of things. Next question we have is, when we are new to the board and want to bring up a resolution, how do we know that it hasn't previously been addressed in earlier boards or committees? I think you're just about to talk about that in the next topic there, really, isn't it? But if you want to address that, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what the resolution or topic is. If it's in regard to an ordinance of some sort, obviously you would find that in your ordinance, in your ordinance materials. Sometimes if it's with regard to a resolution on a public policy matter, different counties have different rules with regard to things that have been previously addressed as well. Some of that, it depends on your definition of session as well, and whether or not items carry over, such as example, policy positions on resolutions carry over from one board to the next. So I think that the question is probably a little more complicated than what it appears. I recommend, if you have questions on that, I would talk to your county board chair or your county clerk about how your county addresses those issues.
Yeah, and maybe the administrator too,
Right.
or administrative coordinator or exec. The other question is it appropriate as a county board member to attend a town board meeting and report in an open forum a topic of interest to the town board? Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that's an open meetings law.
Okay, yeah, so I will.
But yeah, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah. I've seen that handled a couple of ways. Is again, if it's going to be on there, your town board is going to be the one that has to comply, and they should probably have some knowledge of what the substance of your report is going to be. And so I think it would be appropriate, but I think you're going to have to give them a heads up as to what you're going to cover during that comment period. I've sometimes seen supervisors do that during citizen comment too. And, maybe that's a little better, but the concern that I have is the courts, when they talk about agendas and notices, they talk about that the government official has control over the agenda, the public does not. And so that's why a little more leniency is given during public comment. So, if the board is expecting you to comment, or if you have a specific issue, be careful about it, and ask yourself, is there any reason I cannot alert the board that I want to make a report on this? Because, if you're, or certainly the town board couldn't go off on a whole discussion of whatever you may be bringing up on if it hasn't been noticed and hasn't been noticed specifically.
Hey, Philip, I'm noticing we have 5 minutes left to get through meeting minutes.
So let's hold these to the end then.
Minutes, and then for folks that have questions, we are happy to stay on longer than 10:30 in which to answer those.
And maybe I'll see if I can do some of them in writing here too.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to try to get through meeting minutes in 5 minutes. I don't think we'll quite make it, so I apologize. We'll probably run over a little bit, but meeting minutes. Oh, let's see here. There we go. Purpose of meeting minutes is that they really serve as the official record of the proceedings of the governing body. They are really meant to serve as an accurate record that a meeting was held. Meeting minutes are to capture the substance of the official action taken by the body. We're going to get back to substance because that term actually has a statutory definition. And again, a point you're going to hear us make over and over again with regard to meeting minutes. Minutes are not meant to be a transcript of a meeting. There are two places or two sources in which we really take a look at with regard to what should be included in minutes. There is the legal requirements with regard to the substance of proceedings, which is found in statute. Then there's Robert's Rules of Order that talk about what should be included in meeting minutes. And then there's also, again, some additional statutory language found in 19.88 sub 3 of the statutes that does talk about the motions and roll call votes of each meeting of a governmental body shall be recorded, preserved, and open to public inspection. And again, the Attorney General has provided guidance with regard to what that particular statutory language means. He's made it clear that although it doesn't indicate, the statute does not indicate how detailed the record of motions and votes should be, the general legislative policy of the open meetings law is that the public is entitled to the fullest and most complete information regarding the affairs of government as is compatible with the conduct of government business. And in light of that particular policy, it seems clear that a governmental body's record should provide the public with a reasonably intelligible description of the essential substantive elements of every motion made, who initiated and seconded the motion, the outcome of any vote on the motion, and if a roll call, how each member's voted. So that gets us into a segue to substance and what it is that is defined as substance and must be included in meeting minutes. Substance is defined in 985.01 sub 6 of the statutes, which is actually the public notice or legal notice section of the statutes. And substance here is defined as an intelligible abstract or synopsis of the essential elements of the official action taken by a local governing body, including the subject matter of a motion, the persons making and seconding the motion, and the roll call vote on the motion. This is one of those instances when we talk about your sources of procedural rules and rankings. This is one place where the statute ranks above Robert's Rules of Order, because under the definition of substance, you have to, in your minutes, record who makes and seconds the motion, whereas Robert's Rules of Order only requires that somebody record who makes the actual motion and not the second. So with regard to what should be included in the meeting minutes, according to Robert's Rules of Order, you should list the kind of meeting. That, for example, whether it's a regular meeting, a special meeting, an adjourned regular, or an adjourned special meeting. You should list the name of the organization that is included, that should be included on the minutes, the date, time, and place of the meeting, the name of the presiding officer and the secretary or their substitutes, the members present, and whether or not a quorum was established. We should also talk about the action, record the action that was taken on the minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes need to include the exact wording of each motion, the name of the maker, and also the second, and whether or not the motion passed or failed. If there were any points of order or appeals at the meeting, those should be included in the minutes. For reports, the name of the committee and the reporting member, and the hour of adjournment. Robert's Rules also provides some guidance with regard to what not to include in the minutes. That includes such things as the opinion or interpretation of the secretary, judgmental phrases, such as members listen to a lengthy report from the department head, or members express total confidence in something. You also should not include the discussion in the minutes, motions that were withdrawn, or detailed reports. Now, just a few things here with regard to these last set of slides. Robert's Rules of Order says that not only is it not necessary to summarize matters discussed at the meeting in the minutes of that meeting, it is actually improper to do so. Roberts talks about those who are taking the minutes, oftentimes making unnecessary or unneeded work for themselves by putting far more into the minutes than is required or is appropriate. Some of the frequent mistakes in minutes that Roberts points out is trying to summarize reports that are offered. Again, just say who gave the report, the topic of the report, and then place the report on file. Sometimes you'll see folks trying to outline in minutes arguments that were made on both sides of the debate. That should not be included in the minutes. If you have a guest speaker that comes to your board meeting, do not write down everything the guest speaker said. That should not be included in the minutes. Again, just really provide the name and title of the guest speaker and the topic of what they were discussing.
Sarah, real quick too, somebody asked if citizen comments are required to be recorded, and I think that comes under exactly what you're talking about here.
Yep, I would say not to include citizen comments. One thing I'm going to mention, not included on the PowerPoint slides, but I'm sure a lot of us have been to a meeting where somebody has given a lengthy speech, something very passionate, and then they end their speech with, and I want the record to reflect what I said on this particular topic. Just because somebody says, I want the minutes to reflect what I said, does not mean that you need to include those in the minutes, nor should you include those comments in the minute just because somebody is making a demand that they be included in the minutes. All right. Really, this is the core concept, or really the commandment of minutes. Minutes should focus on what the body did as opposed to what the body said. So you'll want to say, the chair announced or the department head reported on these particular topics. But again, you do not want to write a transcript of what happened at the meeting. This is important for a number of reasons. First, if you're publicizing your minutes, or when you're publicizing your minutes in the official publication of the county, it's going to keep your publication costs down if you're keeping your minutes to what is minimally required. Second, you also minimize legal risk by not putting everything in the minutes. If you're taking up some sort of a controversial topic and folks are speaking and people are trying to write down specifically what was said, and it ends up in a lawsuit, you don't want someone to be able to go back to those minutes and point out and use those minutes against the county. In addition, you risk losing neutrality in your minutes if the minute taker is trying to write down and summarize what it is that individuals have particularly said. All right, real quickly on some of these other things. Again, minutes on reports and announcements. Just report that the body received the report, who gave the report, and the subject matter of the report. Place that report on file. Do not vote on the acceptance of a report. Recording formal decisions. If a decision is made by unanimous consent, the minutes should reflect that. If you took a vote, the distribution of the counted votes should also be recorded in the minutes. With regard to roll call votes, it should indicate how each person voted. The AG has also talked about this particular subject as well, and has said that if a member of a governmental body requests that the vote of each member on a particular matter be recorded, a voice vote or a vote by a show of hands is not permissible unless the vote is unanimous and the minutes reflect who is present for the vote. With regard to voice votes, you should indicate the outcome in the minutes, that a voice vote was taken and that the motion carried. You might want to avoid talking about, saying that, it carried unanimously. unless you know for sure that every single person voted. Instead, you might want to indicate that there are no negative outcomes. Again, and we talked about this earlier in local government, you have to record the person seconding the motion, again, which is not a requirement in Robert's Rules of Order. This next point is something that is kind of important, and it is that the minute taker must make sure to get the wording down before the vote is taken. It is completely appropriate for the person taking the minutes to kind of call a timeout of the meeting and make sure that they have accurately reflected what it is what the motion is that has been made before you move on to debate or before you vote on the motion. And again, I know sometimes people who are taking minutes of meetings are somewhat, they're hesitant to interrupt the meeting, but not only should you not hesitate, you actually, in essence, I would say, have an obligation to intervene at that point in time to make sure that it is very clear what it is that everybody is going to be voting on. Approval of minutes are typically done at the subsequent meeting of the body. They say, according to Roberts, that the minutes should be signed by the secretary, and they can also be signed by the presiding officer. I think older versions of Robert's rules talked about the minutes saying respectfully submitted. That language is not at all necessary. Correcting of the minutes, real quickly here. Sometimes minutes, a draft copy of the minutes does not look right. Maybe somebody who was present at the meeting was not recorded as being present at the meeting. Any corrections to the draft minutes can be made at the meeting in which they are being approved at. Those minutes should just, that meeting should just indicate that the minutes were approved as correction. No need to specify the corrections. Non-substantive items can be corrected by the author of the minutes prior to the meeting and prior to adoption. What you're seeing on the screen is really a process that Robert's Rules of Order lays out for correcting minutes once the minutes have been approved. Minutes of closed session. Those are only advisable in rare occasions, but you are required to have minutes if official action was taken in the closed session. When you are writing minutes for closed session, you need to indicate in your open session minutes that the presiding officer announced in the open session the subject matter and the specific exemption that was allowing the closure, the motion to convene in closed session, and the vote for the closed session does need to be recorded in the minutes. So you need to be able to determine each member's vote. Typically, it's done by a roll call, and Daniel talked earlier today about why it is important to make sure that it is recorded how it is each member voted with regard to entering into closed session. And again, the motion to adjourn the closed session is also recorded. Oftentimes, when you're writing your minutes to go into closed session, you'll want to take a look at the agenda and get the specific language off of the agenda with regard to the specific reason that the body chose to go into closed session. As with open sessions, motions and votes in closed session must be recorded. However, a written summary of the discussion is not advisable in a closed session. Another quick note, if you're taking your own notes in closed session, be very, very careful about what it is you are doing with those closed session notes. We did hear of an instance where a county held a closed session meeting, a supervisor took notes, put the notes in the trash can in that particular meeting, and somebody went into the room, pulled out those notes, and saw what happened within that closed session meeting. So again, be very careful with that. Minutes of quasi-judicial bodies. Quasi-judicial body be something, an example of that would be, say, a county board of adjustment meeting. That's when you're making a decision based on the evidence when you're serving in a quasi-judicial capacity. The minutes should reflect the basis for that discussion. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the minute takers may interrupt if necessary to get the exact wording of the motion, or in the event the open meetings law is being violated. Again, encourage the use of written reports that are kept on file, and you should record the arrival and departure of members during the meeting. Just a quick note on audio recordings during the meeting. Yeah, the clerk or committee secretary can utilize an audio recording device to capture the meeting. However, the contents of that recording must be used for the sole purpose of utilizing the recording in order to draft the minutes for the meeting. The county clerk can be the only person who has access to that, or the secretary, whoever it was that took that recording. The minute that recording goes to somebody other than the individual who took that recording for the purpose of taking minutes, it does become a record under the public records law. In order for the county clerk to destroy the record or that recording, they are allowed to do so once the minutes are ratified. However, the county must have a written policy in place to allow the county clerk or the committee secretary to destroy the audio recording once the minutes are approved. And again, if the audio recording is shared with anyone else, the recording becomes a public record. Last slide here. Last thing I do want to talk about is the role of the county clerk. The county clerk really plays an important role in the issuance of an agenda and in the creation of minutes. The clerk can really be your best friend here in making sure that you do not at all violate the open meetings law. In 2013, Act 373, the role of the county clerk with regard to agendas and minutes was clarified to specify that there is a statutory role for the clerk in meeting agendas and the taking of minutes. Again, I can't stress enough how it is advisable to work closely with your clerk to keep you out of trouble with the open meetings law when putting together your agendas and minutes. So as quickly as I could do the minutes piece of this. So I don't know, Philip, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and we'll see if we have questions.
We have a few. So if, we are scheduled to end at 10:30, but if you want, you're welcome to stay. And this full recording will be what will go up on our respective websites. One question goes back to meeting agendas, and the question I think is on correspondence. Are you required to discuss the correspondence or acting on the correspondence?
I think typically when I've been to county board meetings, a lot of times it's as simple as we received a letter from the town of X with regard to this item, or the county's association sent correspondence because they opened up the registration for their annual conference. Typically, I don't see a lot of discussion going on with regard to the correspondence. Philip, I'm sure you have something more to add.
Well, and again, you got to bring up the open meeting law.
Yeah,
if you're going to discuss it, you're going to talk about what the subject matter of the correspondence is and discuss it. And I would kind of add, I'm of the view that correspondence is in Roberts. It's not in the statute that it's required. I would even say in the 21st century, it's kind of outdated, where you can make copies of the correspondence and provide it to every member. I don't think there's any need for the clerk or the chair to review the correspondence. Perhaps if it relates to a specific item on the agenda and it would shed some light on it, but then again, that's noticed. So that's my view on correspondence.
Yeah, if you're going to have correspondence, then you need to list the correspondence that you're going to be announcing at the meeting on your agenda.
Yeah. Someone asked for an example of quasi-judicial body, and you did mention the Board of Adjustment, which is an excellent example.
Yeah, there might be two other examples, possibly a permit, or if you're going to go into closed session to take up a grievance from a county employee.
Yeah, another one would be a quasi-judicial. Again, that's where you're taking in information and basing and applying a decision, applying an ordinance or statute for a conditional use permit hearing and decision would be another quasi-judicial type of body. And then, do you have any recommendations about motions that take a negative form? Well, I think we'll talk about that next week
Yes, I will
But
talk about that. That is part of my presentation for next week. And no, we highly discourage any form of a motion that takes a negative form.
Yeah.
You really want yes to mean yes and no to mean no.
I like how the questions are basically become a preview of coming attractions. Here's a specific county officials handbook, page 138, use of audio recording devices are discussed. With virtual meetings occurring, what is the status of those recordings? I need to leave a meeting now, but hope this can be addressed in writing in next week's session. It'll probably be addressed in the fourth one when Daniel talks about what public records are. If you create a recording of a Zoom meeting, that recording then becomes a public record. Okay, and then this is one I answered. Well, we have an agenda for all committees. Receipt of information matters. Notice from public supervisors not seated as a committee member. What concerns do we have about that supervisors bring up, and what topic engagement? Well, the first thing I point out is a committee meeting is a member of the members of the committee. If other supervisors are there, they're there to listen. If they're going to comment or speak, that will be a committee decision or committee rule that they're going to do that. So how you handle that depends on how you have it set up. But generally speaking, a committee meeting is not a meeting of anybody from the county board. It's a meeting of the committee. Yeah. And then this question here in terms of minutes is how is it different from a public hearing? I think whenever you take meetings at one of your quasi judicial bodies, or probably a hearing on an amendment to the zoning code. You want to address that, Sarah?
I don't know if you have an answer, then I can always
Well,
jump
I'll say this, yeah, because
trying to
I
make
mean,
sure I understand the
basically,
question.
yeah. Well, one of the things, just like you say, that is not the same kind as a meeting. It's a meeting with a hearing. And during a hearing, it's probably a good idea to note what evidence is coming into the body to the extent that you can, because if there's a challenge to that decision, they'll need some sort of record to rely on. It will probably help the body too when they're entering in their debate about making a decision on the particular application that the hearing involves. So it's almost in the question you answered it. You say, is it different? Well, yes, it is different, because the collection of the evidence is important, collection of the record is important. So you're going to take a little more information at a hearing than as opposed to discussions at a meeting. And I would include that would be the case as to the discussion among the quasi-judicial body or the committee or whatever body is conducting the hearing. Once the members start discussing it, there's no need to make any notice to take a record of what their discussion is. And can you adjourn a meeting when in closed session? Yes, you can if your notice indicates that you're not coming back into open session.
Right. If you're going to come back into open session, the agenda must state that you intend on coming back into open session following the closed session.
Yeah.
If you don't intend to, then you could adjourn in closed session.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of agendas unnecessarily say that they'll come back into open session to adjourn, and then that's not necessary. The only reason to come back into open session if you're going to take any further action. Okay. That wraps us up, and obviously with the questions, as you can see, there's a lot of challenges you have as county officials, and we're trying to help you with those as much as possible. Remember, the speakers each referred to resources you have available. I think it's excellent somebody referred to the county officials handbook that you should all have, and if you don't, talk to your clerk and see or to the WCA about getting a copy, because you should have one. And we will be back here next Monday talking about budgets and effective meetings. And I think we have a beginning of a question here. Oh, okay. In the question, somebody says, thanks for sharing the reading room of the law school library, and it is a beautiful place to be. So I appreciate that somebody recognizes that. Otherwise, that we have nothing more for today's webinar, and we are then over, and see you next week, same time and same URL access point. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.